In today's video, we plunge into 6 harrowing outdoor tragedies where every second meant the difference between life and death, from a lone hiker's brutal bear encounter to a flash flood ripping through a life. These stories expose the razor-thin line between daring adventure and sudden disaster. It was August 14th, 2017, a Saturday morning in the Canadian Rockies. The Razorback Divide stretched across Banff National Park. 29-year-old Nolan Chase adjusted his pack straps, unaware that in this unforgiving wilderness, a tragedy was about to unfold that would haunt the search and rescue community forever. Nolan's world was built on precision, strengthened by military discipline, and softened by a deep love for the adrenaline-inducing outdoors. The former Army combat medic moved through life with the same calm he'd shown under fire in Afghanistan. But recently, something new had crept into Nolan's carefully ordered world. An irresistible pull toward the unexplored. It wasn't the mountains themselves that captivated Nolan after settling in Alberta, but the windows they opened to places unmarked on any recreational map. He'd found his calling with local search and rescue teams, or SAR, where he met Rachel Danner, a veteran SAR lead with over 2 decades of experience. Rachel saw potential in Nolan's calm, his fitness, his refusal to take shortcuts. But one habit always worried her: Nolan's tendency to deviate for exploration, especially when photographing unmapped ledges and glacial pockets. When he told her about his solo attempt on the Razorback Divide, she hesitated. The route was notorious: shifting snowfields, unpredictable weather, increased bear activity. She warned him plainly. He assured her he'd accounted for everything: flare gun, bear spray, Kevlar backpack, pre-logged check-ins. Rachel knew he was capable, but something in her gut whispered warnings. That evening, when Nolan missed his scheduled check-in, Rachel was already watching the radar. A storm system had rolled in fast, and by midnight she had a 6-person team flown into the high basin. The next morning, through binoculars, she spotted movement on a high slope. Nolan, setting a small tent on a narrow, snowy ledge beneath a jagged rock outcrop, unaware that the location would be his undoing. The sequence that occurred next happened fast. They saw a motion from the tree line, a flicker in the brush, branches swaying unnaturally, then snapping under pressure. It started as a blur, but resolved into the heavy frame of a grizzly, low, fast, and tracking with purpose. The bear had likely been pushed lower by the incoming storm, seeking shelter or scavenging for food in the thinning snowpack. Nolan's movements, the scent of food or sweat, or even the noise of setting camp could have drawn it in. Rachel bore witness as the bear, close to 500 pounds, emerged near Nolan's camp within 30 yards and closing fast. There was no warning, only the realization that it was already too close. According to the SAR team that witnessed what followed, Nolan spun around, flare gun in hand. The first shot fired wide, flying harmlessly into the thin air. He scrambled for his pack, likely reaching for bear spray, but the bear was already rushing. He turned and ran down slope, but his snow boots weren't made for fast descents. He was stumbling as he fought for balance on the treacherous slope. Each second gave the bear more ground than Nolan could afford to lose. The bear accelerated. Nolan's boot slipped, and he lost his footing completely. The SAR team watched helplessly through binoculars as he slid over the edge of a glacial chute, tumbling into the white void below. The bear followed, also disappearing into the team's sight. What followed was out of view, but not out of imagination. 2 hours later, the team reached the site. When they arrived where Nolan had been, the snow was torn apart, streaked with blood and fabric chunks. They followed destruction, claw marks in snow, blood-soaked drag lines leading to a crevasse rim. There were no signs of Nolan's body, just more blood disappearing into a narrow chute dropping into the glacier below. His beacon had stopped transmitting during the attack, presumably broken from the fall. Over 3 days, teams rappelled into crevices and probed snowfields, but the mountain had swallowed him completely. Nolan was declared missing, presumed dead, on August 17th. The team later said the worst part wasn't the bear or the fall. It was watching from a few hundred yards away, close enough to see every second, too far to intervene. It was July 22, 2018. a Wednesday morning in Orderville, Utah. The desert air was hot and dry, and the steep canyon walls were quiet and everything seemed calm. But deep in one of the park's narrow canyons, something deadly was coming, and no one saw it yet. 24-year-old Clara Min had an engineering mind, calculating risks with the same precision she applied to her studies. Her world was built on careful planning, weather apps checked obsessively, backup gear for every scenario, contingency plans rehearsed. She was pursuing her master's in structural engineering, but the canyon walls called to her more than campus laboratories. However, that July morning, something shifted in Clara's usually cautious approach. The forecast showed scattered storms in distant mountains, yet Utah remained bone dry. The ground was hard-packed, the sky crystalline blue. She and her 3 friends had been planning this adventure for more than 2 months, poring over topographical maps, analyzing elevation profiles, and reviewing every available trip report from the past 3 seasons. Clara even emailed a former guide who'd done it the previous summer, asking about anchor conditions and flow risks. They had timed their permits to avoid peak monsoon windows, and each had practiced ascending techniques in a local climbing gym weeks before the trip. Clara mentioned that the risk seemed manageable. Considering she'd navigated dozens of canyons across the Southwest, her friends conformed. But this time it was different. In the canyons of the Southwest, water doesn't need to fall where you stand. Clara clipped into her rappel line first, testing the anchor and running the rope through her device. Her 3 friends stood above, helmets catching the high desert sun as they waited for her to descend into the shadowed chute below. It was the last moment when everything still felt safe. Halfway down, they heard it, a low murmur at first, like distant wind, but the sound deepened, thickened, became a dull, endless roar that vibrated up through the stone. The friends peered down the canyon's bend. Around the corner, darkness surged forward. A wall of water, thick and brown, slammed into the slot like a freight train of mud. In the space of a heartbeat, calm turned to catastrophe. Clara was suspended 12 feet above the canyon floor when the surge reached her. Her rappel line whipped against the wall and snagged on a jagged ledge. She twisted, trying to unjam it, her dry bag scraping violently against the sandstone. There was no more time for choices, only reaction. She reached for her knife, face pale, eyes wide, but the water hit before she could ascend. The friends above screamed helpless as Clara was thrown sideways by the force. Her harness swung violently and dropped her into the chaos just as the flood crested. She vanished beneath the surface. Her helmet surfaced once, just long enough to strike a protruding rock, then disappeared as her body was pulled into a siphon barely 2 feet wide. Gone in seconds. The others scrambled back from the edge, then moved to a higher ledge trapped by rising water. The canyon below filled like a sealed pipe. They used their phones to call for help, and for 30 minutes all they could do was wait, watching as the flood consumed everything: gear, debris, sound, and hope. A helicopter rescue brought them to safety before the flash flood reached them. Search teams found Clara's body the next morning, lodged beneath a submerged rock shelf over a mile downstream. In the funeral, one of her friends said briefly that Clara always double-checked her gear, triple-checked the forecast, and that she didn't deserve to vanish like that. Orderville remained open, but new signs appeared at its trailhead, small, weatherproof plaques warning that dry skies don't mean safety. One of them includes a date, July 22, 2020. No name, just the day everything changed for a group of 4 who thought they'd planned for everything. It was September 3, 2015, in the Dolomites of Washington State. Among the rock formations was the limestone monolith known as Dagger's Edge, its 3,500-foot vertical face jutting out. Rico Alvarez crouched behind his camera equipment, methodically locking the tripod into the bedrock, unaware that the things that would later happen was anything but routine. He had done this dozens of times before. For 3 years, he'd documented Eric and Jenna Linwood's daring wingsuit flights, capturing their near-impossible stunts from dizzying altitudes. Their YouTube channel had become a cult sensation, part aerial ballet, part Russian roulette. Eric was the showman, cocky, aggressive, always pushing boundaries. Jenna, quieter and methodical, preferred calculations over chaos. Together, they were precision wrapped in madness, their partnership built on trust and an intimate understanding of risk. That morning, the winds were shifting. Jenna had noticed it hours earlier. The wind patterns weren't strong, but they were unpredictable. At breakfast, she'd pointed it to Eric, but his mind was already ready for action. The flight path today was his idea, a razor-line descent, hugging the limestone all the way to a forested ravine. They suited up. Rico zoomed in through his camera lens, watching them do a final tug check on each other. Then Eric stepped to the launch point and jumped off the ledge. The wingsuit inflated instantly, cradling Eric's body into a glide. Rico followed him through the lens. Eric was close to the rock, as planned, just a dozen feet out, skimming the ridgeline. The first few seconds were textbook lines and precise posture. Then it happened. Rico saw it before he heard it. A shift in the trees below, a sudden backward sway. It was almost invisible until its effect hit Eric like a punch from God. His right arm jerked upward violently, wingsuit collapsing on one side. Rico instinctively pulled back the camera to widen his frame. Eric veered left, overcorrected, and his body pitched forward at an unnatural angle. For a fraction of a second, it looked recoverable, until the sound came. A dull, brutal crack that echoed off the rock face like a gunshot. He hit the cliff chest first, bounced off once, then again. Rico lost sight of him as Eric spiraled down through open air, vanishing into the trees like a rag doll. But there was no time to process. Jenna was already behind. Her wings caught the wind cleanly at first, and her descent angle was controlled. But the panic was visible in her adjustments after having seen the accident. Her line is now several degrees off the original vector. She was losing altitude too quickly. Below her, the terrain rose again in jagged outcroppings and a dense patch of pines. She tried to gain elevation by banking right, but her arc was shallow and the wind was uncooperative. From Rico's viewpoint, her legs barely cleared the first tree line before hitting the second. One extended branch caught her left leg. The impact flipped her sideways violently. She slammed against another tree, then pinwheeled through the canopy, vanishing into the foliage below. Rico didn't wait. He grabbed his emergency pack and ran towards them. It took him nearly 40 minutes to reach Jenna. Her wingsuit was shredded along the back, the right arm hanging by threads. Her legs were bent grotesquely and blood soaked under her. She was barely alive. As Rico spoke to 911, her breathing had already stopped. She was declared dead by paramedics airlifted to the site just over an hour later. Eric's body took 2 more days to locate. A helicopter spotted his helmet between 2 ledges. He had died on impact. By the following week, the Linwood's channel had gone dark, every video removed. Rico quietly returned the hard drives to their families and vanished from the wingsuit circuit. He never filmed another flight. It was March 16, 2017. A silent morning in Iceland's Vatnajökull Glacier. The only sounds were the distant whisper of wind across frozen peaks and the occasional crack of shifting glacial mass. 31-year-old Sojin Park adjusted his helmet at the mouth of an ice cave, surrounded by translucent walls that gleamed like cathedral glass. In this pristine wilderness, a tragedy was about to unfold. Sojun had always been drawn to the edges of comfort zones. Born in Busan, South Korea, and raised in Seattle, Sojun blended 2 cultures and a lifelong curiosity into a life defined by movement. He held a master's degree in glaciology, worked freelance in alpine cartography, and published breathtaking drone footage of Arctic terrain. And recently he'd spent months planning an expedition with 3 close friends, Minjae, Lucas, and Eli. All were experienced climbers, but Sojun possessed the technical expertise that made him their natural leader. He was the one who charted new routes, triple-checked gear, and stayed up at night marking changes in satellite imagery. Their destination this time was Vatnajökull's famed ice network in southeast Iceland, specifically an undocumented corridor whispered about in climbing forums, the Blue Labyrinth. But on the day of the expedition, their guide, Halldór, had warned them about a recent melt causing stress fractures throughout the lower chambers. There's a possibility that the fragments of the cave might fall from above. He'd advised them to stay near the upper corridors, but the beauty of the Blue Labyrinth pulled them deeper. Light from their headlamps danced off walls so clear they seemed made of crystal. Roughly 650 feet in, something shifted. A low groan pulsed through the ice, nature's warning that went unheeded. Sojin motioned the group forward across a shallow basin filled with slush water. That's when the sound came. A sharp crack like thunder echoed through the corridor. The ceiling above them split. Haldor yelled from the entrance. Eli sprinted. Lucas slipped but recovered. Minjae ran. But Sojin was mid-stride when the ice gave way. A 10-foot slab dropped straight down, catching his left leg and hip. He fell backwards into the pool, the impact sending waves across the basin. The slab pinned him waist-deep in icy water. Another chunk fell, shattering his helmet. The cave shuddered, smaller pieces collapsing like glass. Haldor reached the ledge 20 seconds later but couldn't cross. The basin was churning, jagged chunks of ice crashing into one another as the collapse continued. They saw Sojin's mouth moved once. He looked up, then stopped. Recovery teams arrived 4 hours later. Divers found him submerged, wedged between ice and rock. He had drowned in the crystal-clear water that had first drawn him deeper. The news reached their families before sunrise. The Blue Labyrinth was sealed permanently. His friends returned to Iceland each year but never speak of the cave. The glacier mourned quietly, its ancient ice holding secrets too profound for words. It was March 9, 2016. The Bering Sea's winds carried that familiar Arctic bite, sharp enough to cut through even the most carefully laid plans. Brielle and Aaron Torrance, both 26, stood at the edge of their fourth day traversing the ice from Cape Prince of Wales toward the ghosted outline of Chukotka, Russia, unaware of how hostile the terrain was going to be that day. They weren't thrill-seekers, this was calculated. Brielle, once a collegiate rower and now an ultramarathoner, had trained obsessively for this crossing, logging months in altitude chambers, learning ice fracture patterns, sleeping in chest-deep snow pits. Aaron had done the same, matching her stride for stride in the preparation. Their sleds carried rations, GPS, 2 beacons, military-rated survival gear. They'd planned every step, every variable. But the Arctic has a way of creating variables faster than they can be planned for. Around mid-morning, roughly 15 miles from the Alaskan coast, they ran into a wall of broken sea ice, a jagged ridge where massive chunks had piled up and frozen into a wall, stretching nearly half a mile in each direction. It seemed harmless, but there was no way through. They debated briefly, then split to scout, Brielle heading left, Aaron right. The plan was simple. Stay within visual range, radio if needed. Regroup within 20 minutes. Aaron kept his eyes on her for as long as he could, tracking her movement between rising chunks of wind-polished ice. Brielle's red parka was a bright pinprick against the endless white. Then the wind changed. Within minutes, the air thickened and visibility plummeted. A whiteout descended, fast, dense, disorienting. The world became noise and brightness. He called her name into the gale, then he heard a scream. It was Brielle, maybe 100 yards away. Aaron moved fast, skiing low to the ground to follow her trail. For 20 minutes, he hunted through the noise, then he saw it. The tip of her ski sticking up awkwardly near a narrow ice gap. He reached her moments later. She'd fallen through a break between slabs. Her right leg had caught on an upright shard of blue ice, deep puncture, bleeding heavily. Her ski was twisted beneath her body. A red fan of blood painted the snow around her. She was breathing, conscious, and trying to move. He acted immediately. Tourniquet with his belt, sleds dragged side by side to build a windbreak, and emergency blankets wrapped around her. He stacked their gear into an improvised trench. He tried activating the beacon, but there was no signal. It required line of sight, and the storm showed no signs of breaking. Brielle drifted in and out. He pressed their parkas around her and checked her pulse repeatedly, watching it slow in stuttering degrees. But hypothermia doesn't arrive with ceremony, it creeps. During the wait, she stopped shivering. Her eyes closed, then opened less frequently. Eventually, she didn't respond at all. When visibility returned at dusk, he activated the beacon. It was 8 hours before the Coast Guard reached them by air. They found him still crouched over her, shielding her body, but she was declared dead on sight. A year later, Aaron returned alone. He finished the route they'd started, carrying her compass in his parka and her wedding ring in a sealed chest pocket. It was November 12, 2018. The Bight of Abaco lay calm above one of the most dangerous cave systems in the Northern Hemisphere. The cathedral, known in diving circles as both sacred and deadly, its tight passages and sudden silt-outs made every descent a gamble. Mateo Rivas had spent his life chasing those edges. At 29, Mateo was a seasoned cave diver with over 400 logged descents, some in the shadowy cenotes of Mexico, others in the tight, lung-crushing tunnels of Florida and the Caribbean. Raised in Tampa alongside his older brother Julian, Mateo had turned curiosity into obsession, and obsession into discipline. Where Julian was measured, triple-checking gauges, scrutinizing gas mixes, logging every variable, Mateo moved with instinct, muscle memory, and a kind of blind faith in his own capacity. Together they were a perfect balance, and they had planned this dive for over a year. The cathedral offered no official maps, only rumors traded between divers and grainy forum threads. There were whispers of a passage dropping beyond 280 feet, a side shaft branching off the main corridor, unconfirmed and unexplored. That was their goal. The plan was precise. A two-stage descent. Julian would remain at the main chamber, managing the tethered video line and audio feed, while Mateo pushed ahead with a guideline and body cam. The first 10 minutes were smooth. Mateo descended with clarity and control. At 227 feet, he gave a thumbs up to the chest-mounted camera. Visibility remained decent. Julian monitored the feed from a waterproof tablet on the surface relay board, watching Mateo's light carve through the cathedral-like caverns. The video was choppy but clear enough, until it wasn't. Julian leaned closer. The feed stuttered, then picked up again. Mateo had entered a side shaft, its walls tight enough to press his shoulders inward. Julian watched as his brother exhaled slowly, flattening his chest to squeeze through. The light flickered, bounced off disturbed silt. Then the camera tilted hard. Mateo was stuck. He angled for leverage, feet braced. The hiss of escaping air filled the mic. Julian called out through the loop. Julian spoke urgently into the loop, telling Mateo to back out, not to force it, asking if he could hear him. There was no response. The feed trembled as Mateo reached toward his left tank. The image blurred. Clouds of silt, the frantic movement of hands. Then the faceplate flashed into view, Mateo's eyes wide with effort, jaw clenched. Julian's voice cut through again, cracking with panic, telling him to stop moving, that he was coming down. But Mateo wasn't stopping. He twisted his body, trying to turn. The slate on his wrist came into view, scrawled with one word in grease pencil. Stuck. Then the camera slammed sideways. For a moment, there was only blackness. Then a final frame. Mateo motionless, the light flickering against his helmet. A faint hiss, then nothing. The feed froze. Julian dropped his headset and suited up and descended. At 210 feet, he found the side shaft. The silt hadn't settled. He crawled in, heart pounding, knowing exactly what lay ahead. Just beyond a jagged choke point, he saw the collapsed rock and the faint glow of Mateo's torch, flickering behind a veil of debris. He tried to dig. The limestone shifted, then sealed tighter. His gloves tore and his hands bled. His brother did not move. Julian stayed until his reserves ran dry, until he had no choice but to leave that narrow space behind. The recovery team arrived 3 days later. It took 6 divers and a pulley system to extract Mateo from beyond the choke point. He had been trapped within minutes, likely from an equipment failure or a surge of exertion as he tried to force his way through. Mateo's funeral was held in Tampa. The casket remained closed. Divers came from across the country, placing slates and dive tags beside the urn. No one has attempted the shaft since. Thanks for watching. If you're drawn to raw, real-life tragedies where moments of adventure spiral into devastating heartbreak, click here to dive deeper.